Budapest,
Berlin,
Madrid,
Lisboa,
Roma.
from Brussels,
Em Bruxelas, desde Bruxelas,
de Bruxelles.
aus Brüssel.
Brussels, my love.
Et merci de répondre à nos questions.
Merci à vous.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for speaking to Euronews.
Euronews.
To find out what these institutions really mean.
Hello and welcome to this live panel debate here from the European Parliament.
We have a lot to talk about today.
Everyone felt that Europe was leading again. Your view on this?
Suddenly the war is at our borders.
We have to defend the real people.
Our security doesn't come for free.
Wolność nie jest dana raz na zawsze.
The European election should lead to a strong unity.
Hello there. How are you?
Hello and welcome to Euronews On Air, live here from the Albert Hall in Brussels. We are officially launching our coverage of the European elections with this unique in-person event, and we have invited some of the most important names in European politics. I'm Jeremy Wilks.
And I'm Maya Delabaume, and we will be guiding you through the next 2 hours of political debate in which we will be recording some of our flagship programs with our live studio audience.
And this event is a moment for us also to celebrate the opening of our new newsroom right here in Brussels, right in the heart of the action across the road from the European Commission. We have an expanded team of journalists covering European news. Today we're also unveiling the results of a unique pan-European opinion poll taken in 18 countries, including a projection of what the European Parliament could look like after the vote in June.
And we can already tell you that this poll, which interviewed 26,000 people across Europe, will get everyone talking. It says, for example, that 46% of Europeans surveyed want more powers in the hands of their government rather than the hands of the EU, as we see it here.
So there we are, up on stage. You can see that. Basically, the question was, do you want more Europe or less Europe?
And there is diversity, which is very interesting too, because we've surveyed in France, for instance, 63% of French people surveyed want more power for their government. By comparison, Spain is quite different, as 32% of Spanish people would make a similar claim, although that's still a third of voters who want a stronger national government. So how can we interpret this difference? What is behind this result? This is something that we will be discussing together.
Absolutely, there's an awful lot to talk about, and I'm sure that if we took a poll in this room in front of me, we may well get some different results, but it's going to be a fascinating set of conversations. So what's on the menu for the next 2 hours? Coming up, Shona Murray will be heading the first of 2 back-to-back episodes of our flagship interview program, The Global Conversation. She's quizzing the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, about the issues that unite and divide Europeans, such as defense, Ukraine, and the Middle East.
Then Sasha Vakulina will interview European Commission Vice President Margaritis Schinas. Sasha will be asking him about how a possible swing from the center to the right could affect European policies.
And then we switch over to everyone's favourite weekend political chat show, Brussels, My Love, presented by Maeve McMahon. She has 6 members of the European Parliament on her panel, so expect a very lively and very political discussion.
Following that, we hear from the world of business in a live recording of The Big Question, our series for industry leaders. Angela Barnes will be putting her questions to Barclays Europe CEO Francesco Ceccato.
And finally, we'll be digging into the results of our poll in depth. We have a lot of time dedicated to that. We really want to see what Europeans think, to try and understand what's in their minds and what that could mean for the European elections.
So let's begin now with our first show, The Global Conversation.
Thank you so much for speaking to Euronews.
Charles Michel, bonjour et merci de répondre aux questions.
Merci à vous.
You're from the right, you're from the left, you're for more Europe, you're less Europe, you're a skeptic of a Eurofight.
Can Europe stay united?
Europe is and will be a fantastic place to invent.
It seems that for Europe, the worst is yet to come.
How can the EU ensure that citizens are behind them?
Are you more bearish or are you more bullish about the future of the European Green Deal?
From the point of view of the objectives, Europe is on track. Now what we must have is the policies and the measures to transform those objectives into reality.
And we're actually working together well with European partners.
The single market brought Europe success. Thanks to the single market, we actually grew up the biggest economy in the world.
It is our main advantage when it comes to convincing companies that they should invest in Europe.
We are very present, we are very visible, we are very vocal, and I have no doubt that this will only increase as we get together closer to the 2024 elections.
I think the European elections should lead to a strong unity of Europeans. Thank you. I'd like to welcome to the stage our first Global Conversation interview, President of the European Council, Charles Michel. Nice to see you. Well, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Really appreciate your time. I think we might get started on what we've heard already this evening, which is the polling. 46% of voters saying that they want less influence by the European institutions, the European Council, the European Commission, and more power, particularly going to national governments. Why do you think that is? Do you think that represents some sort of failure by the institutions, a lack of perception?
No, I'm not surprised, but on the other hand, I know that for many people across the EU, they know, for instance, if we face COVID-19, that the answer, the solution will be at the European Union's level. If there is an energy crisis, if there is inflation, if there is a challenge related to climate change, we need more European cooperation and coordination. And I think it is a mistake to try to oppose the national level and the European Union's level. If we have strong member states, if we have a strong European Union's project, then it will be good and positive for all our citizens across the EU.
Are you worried at all about the apparent move towards the far right, which we're also seeing in a lot of our polling? Are you worried that that might impact on the EU's policies when it comes to workers' rights, women's rights, immigration?
Yeah, a polling is a polling, but it would not be the first time in history that pollings are making some mistakes. And let's see what will be the outcome of these elections. But this is very clear that our democratic model, the fundamental freedoms, human rights, women's dignity, this is put under pressure inside, within the EU, but also from outside. And that's why it's so important to never forget that we need a political project based on the values, the fundamental principles, but also we need to deliver. Our citizens, they are expecting from us to deliver, to improve the conditions of life, to guarantee more prosperity, to innovate, and to guarantee more security and to protect peace in Europe.
And on that issue of delivering and peace in Europe, you said yesterday that if we don't give Ukraine enough support now to stop Russia, that we here are next. Now, we have heard this a lot over the past 2 years, but it is something that is resurgent. We heard, for example, the Spanish defense minister saying, she said she doesn't think that people realize the grave danger we're in right now. Why are you saying that right now? What evidence do you have? And what are you calling for?
First, I feel that we must tell the truth to the people. And we are facing a serious challenge with this decision made by Russia to invade Ukraine. And it's not only a challenge for the Ukrainians, it's a challenge for all of us, all of those who believe in the fundamental principles, in the democratic principles. And I'm absolutely convinced that this is a serious threat. And that's why I think that we did and we are doing what's needed. And we have immediately decided, and we are united, to support Ukraine and to sanction Russia, to put pressure on Russia. But this is not enough. We need to do more. We need to act more quickly. And that's why in a few days, once again, here in Brussels, there will be a European Council meeting. And once again, we'll try to make concrete steps to provide more military equipment to Ukraine, more financial support for Ukraine, and to put more pressure against Russia. And this is needed if we believe in peace and security and prosperity, which are the promises of the founding fathers of this European project.
But you're going much beyond that. You're calling for a war economy, essentially the mobilization of all sectors of the economies throughout Europe. It's a fundamental shift in the structure of societies.
Yes, and you're absolutely right that I want us to do more. Why? Because if we observe the last decades, this European Union's project was based on the idea that we have common values and that we need to cooperate for more prosperity. And this is a successful project. We have delivered, and we are delivering a lot in that field if we compare with the rest of the world, point one. But in fact, we have decided, maybe it was an easy choice from a political point of view, not really to assume our own responsibilities in terms of security and defense and peace dividends. It is a reality, and probably we thought, with the support of the voters, that there were some other priorities. And with the war launched by Russia against Ukraine, we all of us understand that we need to adapt our economic model. We need to invest much more in our defense industrial base. We need to make sure that we cooperate much more at the European level for having more European capabilities so that we have more geopolitical influence in the future to protect our stability and our security.
But why are you saying a war economy now? Is it because the situation in Ukraine that there's a stalemate, that there doesn't seem to be any significant gains predicted for Ukraine in the coming year?
No, you know, if you have a look at 2 years ago, in fact 2 years ago when this war started, many of us, we didn't think that Ukraine would be in a position to resist, and we didn't think that we would be in a position to get united and to be united. And probably we took Putin by surprise, but we took also ourselves by surprise, which is good, but it's not enough. And I have a balanced vision of the situation today. On the one hand, I think it is very good that the Ukrainians succeeded to resist and to push back the Ukrainians, but it's not enough. They succeeded to take more control in the Black Sea. This is very important. We don't talk so much about that, but from a strategic point of view, this is important. But on the other hand, today, this is not a secret that Russia is in a stronger position from a military point of view in terms of ammunition and military equipment. And that's why there is this sense of urgency and that we need to provide more military equipment now, not in 2 years. It will be too late in 2 years. This is now, and that's why this is very concrete. We support, for instance, this Czech initiative. I commend this decision made by the Czech authorities to propose to many other countries to purchase together military equipment so that very quickly this equipment can be delivered to Ukraine.
Okay, well, I want to move on to another major issue, which is the situation in the Middle East, because obviously part of your role as President of the European Council is to build consensus on complex issues amongst EU member states. And we're seeing quite heartbreaking scenes in Gaza at the moment as a result of Israel's response to Hamas's brutal terrorist attack against Israelis on October 7th. But we're hearing things like starvation used as a method of war, as High Commissioner Josep Borrell has said, monumental death toll on children, the lack of basic medical supplies for amputations. Has the EU been weakened by this? Do you feel that there may be double standards, that there's not as much unity or sympathy for Palestinians as there is for Israeli civilians, Ukrainian civilians?
First, I'm observing that we are more and more united at the European Union's level. But we should tell the truth. This is exact at the beginning. Following this attack launched by the Hamas, we were on the same page to condemn Hamas. There is no doubt that this is a terrible, a tragic attack. But on the other hand, it was more difficult to have a unanimous position in the European Council on the topic. Why? Because our member states, they have their own relationship with Israel, with Palestine, their own history. But what's very important is the fact that we are making huge progress. And I'm very confident that in a few days, on Thursday, we will get united with a very strong message based on 2 or 3 fundamental pillars. First one, humanitarian access, no double standards. Each civilian life matters. It must be extremely clear, and each communication from the EU should be crystal clear on that topic if we want to be credible at the international level, point 1. Point 2, we must do everything to avoid any further regional escalation. Lebanon, Red Sea, it is extremely important to do everything from a political and diplomatic point of view. And point 3, we are fully in support of the two-state solution. And on this topic, 27 member states are agreeing without any ambiguity on that question. And the priority will be, as soon as possible, to resume, to relaunch those peace talks. We are very active together with Josep Borrell, with the head of state, the head of government, to engage with our partners, the Arab countries, the United States, and to give a very powerful and strong message. I am confident that on Thursday we will express a very clear, common and united message on this important question.
But do you feel that there has been double standards?
No, I feel, I am very sincere with you. On COVID-19, we did very well. On climate change, we are setting the tone, we are setting standards, and others that are following us. The war against Ukraine, we succeeded to get united and to have a strong position. On the Middle East, I accept the criticism following which it took more time to be united, because the starting point is so that there are differences between the member states. But in a few weeks, in a few months, we are in a position to make significant progress. And the trend, this is the unity. The direction, this is the unity. And this is true, that when there were some ambiguous communications from the EU leadership, it has been used, and it is used by Putin, by the Kremlin, to fuel this idea of so-called Western hypocrisy. And I engage a lot, with with some countries in the global south, like Africa, Latin America, Central Asia. And I can feel that those countries, they are expecting us on the EU side to be very clear, to promote always and everywhere the international law and the rules-based order, including in the Middle East.
Okay, well, President of the European Council, Charles Michel, thank you very much for joining us and being our first interviewee on the Global Conversation this evening.
Thank you.
And back to you, Jeremy and Maya.
Thanks very much, Shona. Thanks to Charles Michel for sharing his thoughts there. What did you take away from that, Maya?
I think Charles Michel really tried to reassure people and among us that there is a lot of European unity when it comes to Gaza, even if we know that there are divergences.
Absolutely.
Let's be realistic.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it was very interesting what he was saying. I could feel that the room was absolutely riveted by that. And now we're moving on to our next global conversation hosted by Sasha Vakulina. She is interviewing the Vice President of the European Commission, Margaritis Schinas.
Jeremy, Maya, thank you so very much indeed. Yes, we are continuing. It's my great honor to invite here on stage the Vice President of the European Commission, Margaritis Schinas. Please join me. Vice President, thank you so much for being here. And let's start with one of the most burning issues when it comes to the EU policies, which is migration. Now, when you became the Commission in 2019, that had already been quite an important and massive issue. Now, ever since, the crisis has gotten to a different dimension with more conflicts and with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. How do you see the current EU migration policies, also given the recent agreement signed with Egypt and Tunisia? Do you think we're going to see more of the agreements of this kind?
In the current political cycle on migration, we had to work at the same time as firefighters and architects. Firefighters in dealing with the many crises, both at our external border, but also within the Union, running from crisis to crisis, from incident to incident, ship to ship. And I would dare say, in most of the cases, successfully managing the many migration emergencies. Next to that, we, for the first time after decades of failure, we managed to produce a major European agreement on a new EU Pact for Migration and Asylum. Since the 20th of December last year, Europe at last has a comprehensive, holistic migration policy that starts at our borders, rather starts at countries of origin and transit, I'll come to Egypt in a second, then on a more federalized control of our external border, and finally on solidarity. On the external dimension of migration policy, we have invested lots of time, of efforts, and many of my colleagues from the president down, President Michel also was very helpful in that. We tried to establish partnerships with the 25 countries of origin and transit that mattered to us on migration. We will never be able to cope internally unless we're able to cope externally. And I think that now with a landmark agreement with Egypt, which follows in the line of our earlier statement with Turkey, following the agreement with Tunisia, now we have a web of partnership agreements with major migration partners that will undoubtedly help us to improve the situation in managing migration flows in a cooperative way.
When it comes to these deals, when it comes to the deals with Egypt and Tunisia, do you think that the European Union is taking into account in the right way the humanitarian aspect?
Look, do you mean human rights or humanitarian is not always the same? In these agreements, our emphasis, our focus is to put migration in the overall context of a comprehensive strategic agreement that also touches the economy, energy, human capital, management of natural resources. We do not want to do migration only with these countries. We want to web this migration dimension into a broader strategic cooperation, and I think this is the method. This is what works. This is what will help us in the future.
Now let's talk a little more about the elections. Migration, of course, has always been one of the most divisive issues for the national politics and for the European politics. We have seen over the past years that across Europe, the governments are shifting right. Are you worried about the possible swing from center to right as the result of the EU elections in June?
First of all, I think that we have to be collectively proud for the European Union because we're a union of democracies. Elections are a good thing for us. This is why people envy us. This is why we're so admired in the world, because we have elections, free, open elections, and the European election is the second most numerous electoral process on the planet after the Indian elections. So, no, I'm not particularly worried. I think that what matters is for Europeans to go to vote and attribute praise or blame on what works and what doesn't. I don't think that we have to jump into a conclusion that this will be a triumph of the extremes or the extreme right that would paralyze everything. Okay, 24% of the Dutch people voted for Geert Wilders, but 76% did not. And he will not be the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. And if you look at Poland, it was not the populist right that won. It was Donald Tusk and his moderate allies. If you look at Rome, I don't see Giorgia Meloni as a catalyst for the extreme Putinophiles. I see her as a barrage to the extreme right and the friends of Putin. So let's wait a bit. let's not jump into a conclusion. We're still on the 20th of March. We still have 2 months. Let's see what happens.
Well, the whole 2 months indeed. But do you consider your political group having an alliance with the far right? And where would be this red line that your political group would not cross when it comes to making possible alliances?
Well, I'm here in my quality as Vice President of the European Commission. I'm not after Manfred Weber's job, but I can offer my personal view of how things are developing. I think the EPP would be at the heart of a broad coalition of moderate pro-European forces, as it has always been the case so far. I do not see the EPP of Kyriakos Mitsotakis, for example, joining any extreme right allies. This will not happen. Kyriakos and Jean-Claude Juncker are the ones who wanted Orban out of the EPP, I may remind you. So I see the EPP central at the heart of the new web of political alliances in the European Parliament. I see that on certain subjects we can work as we did for the Migration Pact with a large chunk of the ECR. Giorgia Meloni and the Italian MEPs of Fratelli d'Italia backed overwhelmingly together with the Liberals, the centre-right and the Socialists are backed. So that's how I see the centre of gravity in the new Parliament.
Vice President, and finally, briefly, do you consider doing more now in terms of motivating the young Europeans to come to the polls and vote in June, specifically those for whom that's going to be the very first election?
Absolutely. I think, okay, everybody followed my Taylor Swift soundbite, but I had something else in mind. I mean, look what happened during the Brexit referendum. We had so many inspiring pro-European figures admired in the UK, but the yes vote failed to mobilize them. And it was a mistake that we paid dearly. Let's not do the same mistake in the European elections. There are so many leaders out there in sports, in culture, in arts, in philosophy, creative industries. We are the envy of the world when it comes to football. In all areas we excel. And most of these people are committed Europeans. They work across borders, they make their reputation across borders. What's wrong with having these people talk to young Europeans and tell them, go to vote? That's, I think, something that governments should also embrace. I'm doing it from Brussels. I don't think that commissioners are the right people to talk to young people to tell them go to vote. Probably it will create the opposite effect. But I take the opportunity of the launch of the new Euronews now to make this appeal to those who lead by example, to the role models. These are the people whom we need.
Thank you so very much for this interview. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Vice President of the European Commission, Margaritis Schinas. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much for this, and we do have more. Let's now go to Jeremy and Maeve, who are backstage.
Thanks, Sasha. That was a fascinating conversation. I really loved listening to that. Maeve, we're backstage here. You're about to go live with Brussels, My Love. You don't normally do this in front of a live studio audience, though.
No, we do not. This is the first time, hopefully, of many. We are so excited to bring the show to this stage tonight and see so many regular viewers and regular contributions in the audience. So lovely. Thank you so much. Great to see you. But before we kick off, I wanted to show you a little bit behind the scenes, what a control room looks like. It's hot and sweaty in here, but there's two faces you have to meet.
It's very warm.
Paul and Louise are amazing producers who you have to take a look at here. They'll be making sure that everything runs smoothly on Brussels.
They've been stressing out over guests, but I think we're all right. What should everybody be looking out for in this conversation?
Well, on Brussels, My Love, we love getting concrete and really digging in deep into policies, but today it's all about politics. With the elections around the corner, I'll be joined by 6 members of the European Parliament, not all at the same time, because that would be too crowded. My job will be to make sure they're short, snappy, to the point, and remind them they're not giving a speech in the European plenary chamber. They're live on Euronews.
Absolutely, it's got to be punchy. And for those of you who are not familiar with Brussels, my love, it is, well, like Euronews, a multilingual programme. So Maeve presents it in English and Spanish, which is already a great achievement. It is then translated into Italian, Russian and Portuguese. And very soon, Stefan Grober will be hosting a version in French and German. Here's a little video to give you a taste for the show.
Welcome to Brussels, my love, Euronews' talk show all about the European capital of Brussels.
The EU. Some people love it, some loathe it, and others dream of joining it. One thing is sure, everyone's talking about it, so let's talk about it too.
That's a question for European member states.
This is going to be then Brussels bubble joke.
From the economy to climate to the EU's role in global affairs, 30 minutes of debate and humour.
In español, auf Deutsch and in English.
Eso sí que lo sé.
De acuerdo.
Nadie, nunca.
Tomárnoslo en serio, ya.
Espera, vamos a escuchar cada uno.
Es gibt keine andere Möglichkeit, es wird zu teuer.
No es normal.
You can adopt any kind of law to tick the boxes.
You misunderstand how the Hungarian parliament works.
Me parece bastante hipócrita.
Passt das nicht zu unserem Rechtssystem?
Tenemos que defender esos valores con las palabras.
To find out what these institutions really mean for our daily lives.
Cortar todo el gas de Rusia.
Y la libertad no es gratis.
The prices won't rocket again.
Die Schlagzeilen ideenlos in Straßburg zerstritten.
So, Brussels, my love, join the conversation in our special EU elections debate live from Brussels, starting now. Hello there. Good evening. A warm welcome to this special live edition of Brussels, my love. We're broadcasting here from the Albert Hall, and I'm delighted to see you all here in the audience. My name is Maeve McMahon. Such an honour to be here. Coming up this week on the show, European elections are around the corner. Brussels is excited, but our voters, with anger rumbling and mumbling all across the continent, we're asking, will voters actually go to the polls in June? And will they vote for or against the European Union? And with war on European soil and Ukrainian troops flapping with exhaustion, we'll be asking whether security and defence are issues that voters are worried about as they go to the polls this June. We've heard so much about this political union, but is it really a reality or just a pipe dream? A warm welcome to our guests tonight. Peter Liese, German member of the European Parliament representing the European People's Party. You can take a seat. Juan Fernando López Aguilar, Spanish MEP from the Socialists. And Gwendoline Delbos-Corfield, French member of the European Parliament and vice chair of the Green Groups. Lovely to have you here. Bit different to our normal vibe, but Juan Fernando López Aguilar, I would like to look at you first, because on a serious note, 9 in 10 Europeans, according to a Eurobarometer, are extremely worried about the cost of living crisis. Is that the main issue that Spanish voters will be worrying about, as opposed to all the work you're doing, for example, in the European Parliament?
Well, actually, in comparative terms, the Spanish economy is doing relatively well, reasonably well, but that will not be the point. The point is that we are all at stake when it comes to electing the only one directly elected supranational legislative body in the world, and it's about the European Union. You saw those figures. The Spanish public opinion is still backing the European ideal and the European raison d'être.
But what about you? The socialists are not doing so well, Juan Fernando. We saw the elections last weekend in Portugal. You only have 4 heads of state now around the government.
Yet to be seen, but I reasonably reckon that social pillar, getting it back on track, migration and asylum, implementing the agreement that we achieved latest December within the Spanish presidency, and having a reasonable perspective that enlargement will go along with deepening the European Union with a change of the decision-making process will suffice in order to get the people really motivated, and particularly the youngsters.
Of
But you're
course,
worried.
there are
I was at that conference, the Socialist Congress over in Rome, and there was a feeling of concern. But let's bring in the Greens, because according to our special poll that Euronews had conducted ahead of the European elections with Ipsos, the Greens are in fact expected to lose a lot of seats. Are you losing your appeal across the continent? Especially the Greens that are in government, they're not doing very well, let's be honest.
Well, first, I'm challenging the polls because I think that indeed we are going to lose some seats in the traditional places where we were strong. But I think that for the moment, appears nowhere the people that we're going to get in Croatia, in Lithuania, in Latvia. Today, maybe I was even talking to someone in Czech Republic where we could gain one person, and this would be a big change for the Greens because for once we would have also an Eastern, Baltic, Central Europe flavor that we have been missing for years. So that's my first point. And my second point is that indeed climate change is not as much an issue as it was 5 years ago, but it's our job now to mobilize people.
In fact, we remember back in 2019, climate was the issue.
Exactly.
The Friday for Futures marcher were out and about. Peter Liese, let's turn to yourself. You are the lead candidate in North Rhine-Westphalia for the elections, Germany's most populous state. You say you're the Farmers' Party, but are you not worried about the images we're seeing of the farmers lately? Did you see the damage they caused when they were in Brussels? They've been very destructive as well when protesting in Germany. Even the farmers' unions themselves couldn't contain their anger.
Yeah, when I talk to farmers, of course, I tell them, be careful, follow the rules, and make your point. Yeah, you know, you need to follow the rules. Everybody has a right to go to the street and do manifestations, but they have to follow the rules. Otherwise, they will not get the public support, but until now they have it. And I think that's a link with your first question, the cost of living. When we do too rigid rules, like prohibiting plant protection products in agriculture land, that was on the table, and fortunately the proposal has been withdrawn by Ursula von der Leyen in the plenary. If we have such regulation, then of course the cost of living will increase. Food was a driver of inflation during the last months, and that's the reason, not only the points that the farmers make, but also the effects on average people. That's why I don't accept when they break the rules of law, but
they burn things in Brussels, and they get FaceTime with the Prime Minister of Belgium and with the President of the European Commission. Many would argue they're getting very special treatment. But let's stop you there.
I have met only farmers that were addressing me in a correct way, so I'm not responsible for Mr. De Croo.
Farmers. I'd like to bring in some voices now from the streets of Brussels, because I'm sure most people in this room are registered to vote. But are people here on the streets of Brussels, are they registered to vote? Do they know about the vote? And what would be on their minds, I wonder, when they're voting?
Election? Like, what do you mean?
I'm from the Netherlands and I'll definitely be voting. I'm hoping that people will come out to vote, and particularly young people, because I do think there's a more progressive vote there.
I'm from Italy. I'll be voting yes. Climate change, for sure. Peace.
I'm from Belgium, Antwerp, and I don't gonna vote. I don't know how it works.
I'm half Belgium, half Irish, and yes, indeed, I will be voting. I think the rise of the far right's quite scary, I have to say.
I'm from Leuven, and I will vote. Immigration is a theme, and I'm not thinking that Europe is resolving it very well.
No, because I have no trust anymore in any government, any political system.
It's our duty to vote, and we will vote.
I'm from Sweden, and I will be voting. I haven't studied the participants particularly carefully, so I have to do that.
I would want a candidate, or at least some political party, that will really hold it dear to its heart to make sure that the transition is going to happen.
So lots of food, I think, for thought in that clip. Very interesting how one lady was counting on the young people for the progressive vote, but then some young people interviewed there were not even aware that there were votes this June. Gwendoline, does that feel like a bit of a thump in your stomach?
No. I mean, first, I'm in fact surprised because most of them knew. So you chose people around the parliament. I'm sure you would have gone other streets in Brussels. You would have had much more people that don't know about elections. How would people know? I mean, you know, when do our national politicians talk about Europe? When do they put Europe at the middle of the discussions? Today, European legislation has a great influence and impact in our everyday life. And in France, for example, it is never ever a debate in media and in politician world.
Well, Euronews
will
be interrailing across the continent ahead of those elections to pick up some voices outside urban areas and cities, which of course views differ hugely. But of course you'll be competing in these elections with the likes of Jordan Bardella, the 28-year-old French leader of the National Rally. He's a sensation on TikTok. Are you, Juan Fernando?
I'm trying to, but the thing is that this has been the existential challenge of the European Union throughout its history. It's always been like that. I mean, the European Parliament directly represents 403 million European citizens in 27 member states, and yet they don't know enough about it. Of course, there's Euronews, but that's not enough. We need to build up a European public opinion. We need to build up a European citizenship. We need to build up a European sense of belonging to the European experience, and that is the opportunity we have whenever we have elections, to get the people going, for vote, because the laws we make in the European Parliament are determining the national legislation of all 27 member states. Most of them are framed, more than that, determined by the EU legislation. So
you're convinced, you know, but that's the pitch you need to bring to your voters. But let's now step down to our studio audience and bring in one very engaged one lady. She's a climate activist and environmental and justice campaigner. Her name is Chloe Michel, and she's here with us tonight. We are thrilled to have you. Please pose your question to our panel.
Thank you very much for inviting me. So indeed, I am a climate and social justice activist, and I have a question for the panelists. So 2 weeks ago, the European environmental body, who is essentially an institution of scientists that's tasked with advising the EU institutions on environmental matters, published a report that essentially said that Europe is dangerously unprepared to face the consequences of climate breakdown, and that we need to urgently pick up the pace when it comes both to mitigation but also adaptation. What we're talking about is literally hundreds of lives that will be lost just from heat waves, and we're talking about 1 trillion euros in cost every year just from coastal floodings. So we definitely need the Green Deal more than ever, but at the same time, there are people on this panel that are representing political parties that are currently colluding with some economic interests that are doing everything to preserve the status quo, and even in some cases with the far right to essentially kill the Green Deal. Commissioner Skilders mentioned that young people need to go out to vote, and indeed they do, but they do care about climate breakdown and they do care about the cost of living crisis. So my question is quite simple, and it should be able to be answered by yes or no. It's, do you still stand, or do you stand nowadays for a pause on environmental regulation or not?
Thank you so much, Chloe Michel, for that question. Now, we're not going to ask the Greens to answer that question because we know your answer. So let's perhaps start with the European People's Party. Peter Liese, very simple question.
The answer is, of course, yes. And I ask everybody watching this show and looking at European politics to don't be superficial. You know, the biggest climate law ever, the ETS, has been not only supported by my political group. I was the rapporteur, the leading rapporteur, and the most important new part of this, the ETS2 for road transport and for heating, was opposed by 5 political groups. The far right, the ECR, the left, the Socialists, and the Greens. And so this is the truth. I fighted it through. I convinced step by step many, many colleagues, and I'm still very proud of this, and I will defend this biggest law. On the other hand, we had a lot of detailed, very bureaucratic legislations, which I think we rightly opposed. So being in favor of climate policy doesn't mean being in favor of all the details. Let's fight about the right way and not be superficial. Climate is a priority for me, and will fight for the implementation of the ETS as long as I can.
Thank you for that answer, Peter Liese, even though in Bucharest at the EPP Congress, the Green Deal was getting a couple of boos. But I'm afraid we'll have to leave that topic there.
This is also superficial.
I was there.
Shouldn't repeat it unless you give me the opportunity. We stick to the Green Deal, but I'm very much in favor of our Congress document that we need to look more on competitiveness. No Indian, no Chinese will follow us if we are not competitive. We need to bring the things together, climate and competitiveness, and that is in our document. That's I'm standing for.
We're going to stop you there, but I have to say that I was there, and when names like Greta Thunberg and Franz Timmermans were mentioned, there was a lot of booing in that room. But we are going to move on with the next topic here, because of course now we have a little bit of a flavour of what will be on the minds of voters this June. But what about the future of the European Union? Where do we stand here internally and of course as well on the global stage? Juan Fernando, you've been an MEP now for 15 years. Do you think the future of the European Union is bright or very, very bumpy?
The world is bumpy, unruly, more than ever before. The world order that we built up after the Second World War is fading away before our very eyes. And we need to go global. The European Union needs to go global. It takes global actors, and our scale of being globally relevant is the European Union. No member state can make it on its own. No France, no Germany, no the smaller ones. No one can make it on its own. So we need actually to stick together and take ourselves seriously when it comes to security matters, when it comes to Green Deal, fair green transition. No one can blame the European Union of not having tried this mandate of making it right, and we need to open up a conversation about the future of the European Union.
That is what we're having.
But it's a democratic choice. We have in
so do we, Gwendoline, need to change then voting rules and reduce, for example, national veto power?
Of course we need. I mean, I think that one prime minister has shown this very clearly to everyone. He's called Viktor Orban, and he has been using this leverage for months now, not only to suppress rights for his own citizens, but today he is a danger for all EU. He's even a danger for the accession, because some member states are thinking, should we open to Ukraine and the Balkans when we already have Orban inside? So yes, we need to have a better balance between what we do in Parliament. We are the representative of citizens, what the commissioners do, and what the member states have as powers at the final moment. And today, on certain things, they are even abusing the power they have. They don't have to do unanimity all the time. It's even the laws today that they are abusing, because even when unanimity is not needed, they still do it. And this is encouraging someone like Viktor Orban, and tomorrow probably others.
And you, Peter Liese, you've been a member of the European Parliament for 30 years.
Almost, yeah.
Almost 30 years. Do you sometimes get very cynical about how it functions?
Sorry?
Do you get cynical and frustrated sometimes about it?
I hope not. You know, we see challenges, but we also see again and again the pro-Europeans teaming up and defending our values. You know, in the last European election in Germany, the opinion polls also said that the far right will be very strong, but society mobilized, not only politicians. I agree with Margaritis, it shouldn't only be the politicians, it should be society explaining why Europe is important. And we managed to get the far right in Germany lower than in the national elections. And I saw opinion polls in Germany where we can repeat this story. So we can. I'm quite optimistic for the outcome of these elections, at least in the country I know best. Other countries I cannot value. We can make it if we use the next weeks to really mobilize the center, and I think the center is pro-European.
Well, let's see. Just on that note, on the future of the European Union, I'd like to step down into our audience once again and bring in Petros Vassoulas. He is the Secretary General of the campaign group, the European Movement, so a man who's been studying how the European Union functions for decades. So Petros, lovely to see you. Can you please now pose your question to our panel?
Of course, and the question is about enlargement, one of the most successful tools in the EU's arsenal to promote prosperity, stability and peace. Now, we have a whole host of countries applying to join the EU, not least because of the precarious situation across our continent and beyond. How can the EU prepare economically, but also institutionally, to welcome these countries in, and what effect the next enlargement will have, both on the member states that are currently members, but also those that are about to join?
Thank you so much, Petros. Great question there. Juan Fernando, would you like to tackle that?
That is the right approach. When we spoke of enlargement, we usually tend to think that we are examining candidates. We have to examine ourselves. Are we ready to enlarge with this decision-making, with the scale of the parliament? Are we ready to incorporate Ukrainian MEPs, Moldavian MEPs, the Balkans MEPs, without change when it comes to decision making, without change when it comes to policy making? No, of course the answer is not. We gotta get ready for it. We gotta keep up, we gotta live up to our promise. I understand that enlargement has a positive dimension. It means that we are still attractive, that we are still a beacon, not only of hope, as we usually say, but also of actual improvement of the quality of life and the expectations of so many European citizens around us, which are just longing to be part of us, to belong. But then, still, we have to take ourselves seriously. We cannot simply, without any self-criticism, tell the people, we are counting on you, we are getting you on board, without taking seriously what kind of a challenge it is. Think of agricultural policy, think of own resources, think of budgets, think of the parliament.
That's a lot to think about. I'm going to stop you there.
It takes a lot of energy to incorporate all those who have been somehow incentivized.
The German government, though, has asked for this topic of enlargement to be kind of muted for the next couple of months while you're in campaign mode. Is that a good idea?
I think we need to prepare ourselves. I fully agree that our structure is not ready for enlargement, but that means we need to change it. On the other hand, when you mention the German government, the most urgent thing is, people in Ukraine are, of course, waiting for being a part of the European Union. On the other hand, they are about to lose the war. I'm really concerned that during a few months, maybe even before we vote for the Commission President or the whole Commission in the second part of the year, we will see another scenario. And I really hope that all Europeans mobilize in favor of Ukraine, and when the Chancellor is praising the current German government, there is something wrong. I'm with the Greens here.
Well, let's get the view here for the Greens on this.
Right in that question.
Well, we need to engage in another way that we've been doing for years. We need to involve citizens and civil society much more. We have to challenge the governments that are still too much corrupted. We have to challenge autocratic tendencies, because we need these countries to be fulfilling democracy, and there's a huge path for that. It can be done, but we're not strict and severe enough with the oligarchs that are sometimes coming up in these countries. So institutionally, we need to change the way that we work with them. And then economically, well, yes, we need to own resources, and we need to enlarge the way that we work together. And once again, unanimity is one of the biggest blockages in all of this.
A lot to do, but I'm afraid I'll have to stop you there as we have come to the end of our panel. Thank you so much to our guests. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Peter Liese, Juan Fernando López Villar and Gwendoline Delpes-Corfield. Now it's time to head over to Ida Sanchez from Euronews, who's been taking a look at social media throughout the day and hear what people there have been saying about the upcoming European elections and also the topics we're covering here tonight.
Indeed, Maeve. So one of the key points of these elections is that all politicians are trying to reach young voters. And despite we saw a surge of participation in young people in 2019, we all know that young voters are the most difficult to convince. So, the truth is that the young generations are the ones that will shape the future. We all know social media will play a huge role. We have seen youth standing for topics such as climate, gender equality, and all those emerge as youngsters were becoming more and more engaged. So in Euronews, we have posed a question to our social media followers. And the question is, should 16-year-old voters be allowed to vote EU-wide in the European elections? You may all know already that in Belgium, Germany, or Austria, 16-year-olds will be allowed to vote from these elections. But the answer that we got from our social media followers is clear. 62% of them think that young citizens, young people from 16-year-olds, should not be allowed to vote in these European elections. So I'm sure that your next guest will want to tackle this question, Maeve.
We will indeed. Thank you so much to Euronews' Ida Sanchez. But now, welcome back to Brussels, my love. If you've just joined us, we're here broadcasting live from the Albert Hall in Brussels. Brussels, my love, is our weekly flagship show with me, Maeve McMahon. Coming up on this panel, With the clock ticking down to the EU elections, we're asking if Europeans are as motivated as the Brussels bubble, and if people will be voting for a more integrated EU or less. We'll also be asking if security and defence issues will be on their minds. A very warm welcome to Michiel Hoogheven, Dutch member of the European Parliament representing the European Conservatives and Reformists, Mark Botenga, Belgian member of the European Parliament from the Left Group, and Abir Al-Salani, Swedish MEP from Renew Europe. Thank you so much for joining us. Lovely to have you here at our special live edition of Brussels, My Love. Abir, I'm going to start with you. You're in campaign mode. So what are you pitching to Swedes? Are you pitching more EU, more integrated EU, or less?
The Centerpartiet in Sweden are pitching keep the limits. And it is also keeping the limits to the far right, keeping the limits towards Putin, but also keeping the limits to the over-bureaucracy of Brussels that tends to harm our reputation as a pro-Europeans. So keeping the limits will be our pitch to our voters, both when it comes to ideology, but also over bureaucracy.
And Mark Botenga, what about you? How have you been getting on as we head towards these elections?
Well, I mean, the poll you showed is very clear. There's no majority for, the people don't want more EU competence, more centralization. And you see this disconnect with European politicians. The majority of European politicians, also in Parliament, systematically vote in favor, right? Now, this would be a good idea if you had an EU that served the people. But the people have seen over the last years, like with the energy crisis, right? I mean, the massive purchasing power crisis. People were expecting measures from the EU. It took 1 year before the first real measures came, and they were never applied. So people are like, all right, this EU, it speaks about social rights, democracy, whatever. But when we have issues, they're unable to block the prices, to block the energy prices. And they can meet each other at Versailles and whatever, be fancy. They get 30,000 euros a month, but they abandon us. So we don't want to give them more power. And that's a powerful signal that should be heard.
And what's your take on all this?
Well, we're campaigning on a European Union that the citizens actually want. And that is when you look at the polls, indeed you showed the figures. There was also a poll conducted in the Netherlands. I think it was 48% who said we don't want any more legislation going to or power going to the European Union. So what we're saying is we should go back to the basics of the European Union. What was the European Union? What made it such a successful project? That's the common market. That's free trade. That's what people want from the European Union. They want free trade and to tackle migration.
And of course the big question
but also human rights and democracy and freedom, and that is very, very apparent, even in Holland.
Well, if I may respond to that, the initial idea of the European Union was to create freedom via free trade, to create interdependence. That's what people wanted from the European Union, not this overarching, ever-expanding bureaucracy that is in the nook of everyone's life.
By values.
But freedom that perhaps has been taken for granted, no?
Well, we see that freedom is under threat, but we also see that freedom is still very much expanding in the world. We see that if we initiate free trade, if we have countries around the world having a middle class, being able to prosper, for example, via more free trade agreements, we can create a better world.
Well, you're convinced. I mean, the question is, are voters convinced? And will voters go out? Because the turnout wasn't brilliant back in 2019. 1 in 2 Europeans went out to vote. And one lady that's trying to change that is the European Parliament President, Roberta Metsola. She's been on a whistle-top tour around the continent trying to encourage people to vote. That's why she couldn't be with us here physically tonight, but she did prepare a special message.
First of all, greetings to everyone here at the Euronews on-air event. Over the last years, Europe has delivered in an unprecedented way, and I think this is widely recognized across the continent. We have procured vaccines for all. We have been firm and united in our support for Ukraine, and we are bolstering our collective security. However, we cannot become complacent. We need to keep delivering and making the case for Europe. But we must also be honest about where we could have done better. If we do not listen to people's concerns and worries, we will lose out to those who just want to destroy rather than build. My message is, do not take Europe for granted. Your vote matters. It matters for our freedom, our rights, and our way of life. Your vote matters for the kind of Europe you want to see. The people you elect will shape policies and adopt legislation that will affect your everyday life, day in, day out. Do not let anyone else choose for you. Vote.
Roberta Metsola there, the President of the European Parliament, making the point that politicians need to be more honest, that you've been too complacent, too comfortable there.
I always find it entertaining when I look at the Brussels bubble that we are always shocked. So we had the referendum in the Netherlands on the European Constitution, we had the one in France, we had the Brexit referendum, and we are always shocked. When we see these polls, we are always shocked. But maybe we should look at ourselves and look at the voters and say, okay, why are people voting in this certain way? Maybe it's because they want a course correction of the European Union. They want the European Union to do less with more support instead of doing more with less support.
And they want to be heard. People that we speak to all across the continent on Euronews feel they're always left outside in the cold, they do not have a say, and they're not participating.
Well, I mean, I tend to disagree with my ECR colleague here. Our main problem is that we have members of the parliament wanting way too much, let's be honest. I mean, from the right to the left, they want way too much, me included. And then you have a commission that sometimes tries to strike a balance, but fails in the follow-up of the implementation of the law. We have a lot of very nice legislation that they are not implemented and the Commission is not doing anything about it. And then you have the Council. I mean, Charles Michel was here just a second ago. The Council that is always saying no to basically everything that comes, the good and the bad.
So how can we then explain to our viewers what's going on, what Brussels is all about?
Yeah, I mean, that will be actually, that is the self-reflection that we need to do as politicians in all three institutions. How are we strengthening Europe by doing what we are doing?
And this boils then back down to the question, when we talk about giving more power to Brussels, how much power should the Parliament have?
Well, I think the Parliament is a democratic institution. It's elected, so it should have power. But let's be clear, this is about policy. People want to see policy. If you go to, who has the power and whatever, it's an important debate. But people want to see measures. We're in Brussels, right? Brussels, 1 out of 3 people here are at risk of poverty. 1 out of 3. Many people inside the bubble do not even know this, do not even care about this. And so then you can be there, yeah, we need to be pro-European. People want to see results. Throughout Europe we have these issues. And so unless we get a clear breakaway with the current economic policies of the European Union and a refusal, for example, of the return of austerity, people will turn away.
Well, would you be willing, for example, to take a pay cut on that very handsome salary?
Oh, absolutely. Not only this, I'll tell you this. I've continued to live at the basic salary, the average salary of a Belgian worker throughout my mandate, because I do believe that if you get 30,000 euros, like the Commission President, you cannot know what European workers are living, are going through. And that has a massive impact on your policy, because if you don't know, if you're not afraid of that energy bill that's going to come into your post, whatever, you're not going to take the measures that the people need.
And indeed, we cited that Eurobarometer earlier saying that 9 in 10 Europeans were kept up at night worrying about making ends meet, a topic that we will see come to the forefront in these elections. But I'd like to move on to our next topic, our fourth and final topic, which is that of this talk of a geopolitical union. Those were the words of the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, when she gave her pitch to members of the Parliament back in 2019. It was following on from Jean-Claude Juncker's words about his political commission. So, Michi, looking at you, 5 years later, are we really a geopolitical heavyweight?
The European Union should be a geopolitical weight in terms of the economy. We have 3 pillars in our security on the European continent. The first one is the member states. They protect democracy, they protect sovereignty. The second is NATO. NATO is there for our collective security. If you pay up to NATO, you have an effective collective security alliance, together with our friends across the Atlantic. And the third one is the European Union. That's our economic security. We should go to countries. We should engage with them. We should have free trade agreements, because currently China is eating our lunch and our dinner.
China is eating our lunch and our dinner. Would you agree with that, Abir?
Well, we have not been playing in that game for a while because we have been making it so difficult for our companies to actually, thanks to the left and the far right, to actually be competitive on the global arena. We are putting on more and more administrative burden and red tape. We're making it much more difficult to actually be a part of the global competition. And we are blocking, or some of you, are blocking even international or EU trade agreement. So, I mean, yes, we want that, but on the other hand, the powers are blocking it because you're ideological. So you have to decide somewhere what do you want. I mean,
yeah, you have to have your ideas clear in your head. But you mentioned NATO. And of course, EU-NATO relations have improved a lot in the last couple of years, whereas a few years ago, the institution was brain dead, according to some. Now it's revitalizing, it's expanding. Sweden just joined, and Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary-General, is showing up a lot more in the European Parliament, and he actually prepared us also a comment for tonight's show. Take a listen now to the Secretary-General of NATO.
To prevent the war from escalating to a full-fledged war between Russia and NATO. And the way we have done that is to increase our military presence in the eastern part of the lines with more battle groups, with more forces, with high readiness. We just now have a big exercise called Steadfast Defenders with tens of thousands of troops, demonstrating to Ukraine our ability to reinforce, to protect all NATO allies. And as long as we do that, there will be no attack on a NATO allied country because Russia knows that the whole alliance is there.
The Secretary-General there of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg. Mark Botenga, is this something that your voters or potential voters are worried about, that there could be an invasion in EU countries in the coming months and we might not be prepared?
I think when I speak to people, many of them are actually concerned about where this Europe is going. So they're getting the message of the return of austerity. So they're getting the message that there will be cuts in pensions, there will be cuts in social services, public services, and at the same time, we're being told that there's going to be a lot more money going to the military industry. And they're like, how's that possible? Why are there cuts for us, but there's so much money for the military industry? And there's one question which I thought was particularly interesting, said we're already spending 3 to 4 times more as European countries than Russia on defense. If we're unable with that amount of money to defend ourselves, where's that money gone? And now we need to give those same politicians that with that money have been unable to create a decent defense, more money. Never. So this is, I think, a very strong concern. And I think if we want to look at threats, a real threat is the escalation of this war into a regional or a continental conflict with nuclear weapons. And this requires diplomacy. And on this, we need a breakaway. The European Union stands weaker today than it stood at the beginning of the von der Leyen Commission. Why? Double standards.
Let's
we have not had the same standards on Ukraine.
Michiel's take on that and all this talk in this town about potential defence commissioner in the upcoming commission, also 1.5 billion euros being earmarked in future budgets in order to publicly procure together when it comes to arms.
Yeah, in Brussels there's now this cliché that we should be very afraid of the one who is in the White House because it will be a threat to our collective security. Well, we've been a threat to our own collective security by not investing enough in our own defence industry. So that's one. Now, the second is, ask yourself, so we want to be more European on the defense front, so we want to be less reliant on the one who is in the White House. So we make ourselves more reliant on the actors that we all here are so afraid of, Orban, the former Polish government. So we want to work more together with them instead of the one that's on the White House? I don't think so.
But what about your voters, Michiel? Are they happy to pay more when it comes to defense? Are they concerned about war?
Of course, of course. I think that the geopolitical reality is now showing that our freedom, that our democracy, that our ways of life are under threat, that the geopolitical tides are shifting. So we should be stronger aligned with our allies, with our democratic allies across the world.
Abir?
Well, you know, I am maybe one of very few politicians acting today who actually survived 2 wars during my lifetime. And for me, creating a better future for my children is of utter importance. And you cannot create a safe future without these 2 things: cooperation in Europe, but also security and defense and boots on the ground. With that, I'm not meaning that we should have an European army, but we should have a very strong cooperation within the NATO of the European pillar, because Trump is very, very clear with what is his agenda. He even invited certain countries to, to bomb NATO members if they were not to be paying their economic, financial obligations towards the NATO. So, of course, who comes to the White House will be utterly relevant to how the NATO will function. But with that said, we should strengthen the European axle inside the NATO and try to cooperate more there. Do you know that for every 6 Russian missiles that are fired at Ukraine, Ukraine is firing back 1 missile? This is actually what is at stake, ladies and gentlemen, and don't be fooled by this thing about diplomacy. Ukraine must win this war because Ukraine's victory means European security.
And on that note, that Ukraine must win this war. We have come to the end of this very special live edition of Brussels, My Love. A very, very warm welcome to our panellists, Michiel Hoogheven, Mark Botenga, and Abir Al-Salani for being with us. And thank you for watching.
Thank you, Maeve, and thanks to our 6 MEPs for that very lively conversation. Maeve, what are your main takeaways from this conversation?
Well, I think we gave our audience there a little bit of an insider glimpse into how debates in the European Parliament actually go. There's a lot of squabbling, but there's so much at stake. We covered a lot of issues there. There's so much at stake. So what we tried to do on Brussels, My Love, is create a dinner party vibe. We don't always get on, but we have to talk about the important issues. But who cares what I think? I care about what our viewers think. So please let us know. BrusselsMyLove@Euronews.com.
Thanks, Maeve. It really was a fascinating conversation. Thanks very much for that. And everybody, I recommend that you check out that show on Euronews and Euronews.com. We're live at the moment, and it is just a pleasure to be with this crowd here, to be streaming online on Euronews TV as well.
So we've heard from the politicians. Now it's about business leaders. Well, soon we'll be talking to the CEO of Barclays Europe, Francesco Ceccato, here on stage for The Big Question.
And please do take some time to go over to euronews.com/business, which is our hub for business news, which we've been boosting recently with a lot of really fascinating news articles. And of course, those great magazines that we produce, such as Real Economy, such as Business Planet. And we've also got a new podcast called My Wildest Prediction, which is great for podcast fans.
So now we're ready for a unique live recording of The Big Question.
This is a new era for Europeans, an era of interconnection, where geopolitics and economy are inseparable.
We can reach our climate targets. All the countries should believe that this is achievable.
Innovation meets disruption, and uncertainty meets never-ending opportunities. Get the latest news and analysis on Europe's economy, business, and markets.
The most brilliant minds in business. Vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness.
The new industries that result from what we're doing will be better for people.
Will be growing, sustainable.
And that's just the nature of the business.
From the Eurozone's diverse economies to its emerging startups.
Station F is the world's biggest startup campus based in central Paris.
We discuss what makes the world entrepreneurs tick and see the bigger picture of what's going on in the world of business.
AI is not your friend.
I would say Europe could do better. I would say the world could do better.
Welcome to The Big Question, the series from Euronews, which seeks to answer some of the biggest topics on the business agenda.
See the big picture.
Good evening and welcome to this special episode of The Big Question, our new business series. I'm Angela Barnes, Euronews' new business editor. Now, please, can I welcome to the stage our guest, Francesco Ceccato, the CEO of Barclays Europe. Francesco, it's a pleasure to have you on this special edition of the show, live from Brussels. Now, with the economy, of course, there is a lot to talk about. But to set the tone, let's start off by talking about, first of all, the current state of the economy in Europe. Now, according to the IMF's European outlook for 2024, it will be a gradual recovery this year. As prices decline and wages increase, Europe's consumers are starting to recoup that purchasing power. Of course, that's going to differ across the bloc. But in your view, is Europe really at a turning point?
Yes, I am optimistic. I think we do have reasons to believe in a brighter outlook. And the reason I say that is because the monetary policy that we've seen impacting the European economy has had its effect, and inflation is falling, and it's falling fast. Now, you have the occasional blip in this or that particular element of data, but the trend is very clear. And so that's one particular positive piece of news. The other one, as you mentioned, is, of course, that wage growth has taken place, and so there is clearly a lot more spending power and a lot more disposable income in the European Union. And while the labor market has shown a little bit of slack, we haven't really seen labor shedding by firms. And I think that's some of the sort of background why I'm feeling optimistic. I think with this backdrop, there's going to be an opportunity for the ECB to begin its cutting cycle. We expect that to begin in June and likely to cut at every meeting up until January of 2025. So we expect the deposit rate to go from 4% today to about 2.5% then. And I think, if you like, that combination of having a strong employment foundation, which really, although it's gone up slightly by about 20 basis points, we expect it to go up, the unemployment rate. At the same time, with inflation coming out of the system, we think that combined with interest rates is going to really give a powerful stimulus to consumption and investment. And based on all that, we are expecting perhaps the first half of this year to be still relatively stagnant, and the second half to see a growth, incipient rebound.
Okay, Francesco, and of course this could change dramatically because this year, 76 elections, including, of course, Europe. That's around half the world going to the polls, which equates to around 4 billion people in 76 nations. That's really incredible, including, of course, the EU elections. So the big question here is, how might these forthcoming elections change the business landscape?
Yes, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. I think you clearly should maybe ask that question to some of the other people in this audience who might give you a better view. But from my perspective, I see no real game changer on the horizon in terms of the political or fiscal integration of the Union as a result of these elections. And if we believe the polls suggest that perhaps we are moving perhaps slightly to the right in terms of the overall composition of the European Parliament, which would probably make political and fiscal integration even less likely. So that's sort of where I'd be on that. But at the same time, we do see elections as a time of market volatility from time to time. That isn't all bad. We typically want to think about market volatility as something to worry about. Not every business has that particular component to the way it thrives. Our markets business thrives on volatility. And so if our markets business does well, then we can obviously support other businesses. So I think overall neutral to potentially positive.
Okay, and just picking up there on volatility, Francesco, because we saw February 2022 when the Ukraine-Russia crisis began. Oil and gas prices went sky high, of course. Now, the EU is talking about the markets on consolidating capital markets across member states to open up investment opportunities for citizens, very high on the EU political agenda. How do you think that's going? And what further progress needs to be made this year? And as well, just tying in there, if there's any particular avenues EU funds should be directed towards.
Yeah, so I think the Capital Markets Union project and in general sort of focusing on the capital markets has to be one of the top priorities for policy for the next parliament. That and competitiveness. And the two really go hand in hand. And why do I say that? Because companies have to have the oxygen of capital markets to invest in growth and innovation. And there is a point at which you run out of the ability to continue to fund growth and fund innovation if you're just looking at founders' capital and bank finance. So being more deliberate about the Capital Markets Union is essential. And I think this is going to require a lot of compromise building, a lot of consensus building. And from my perspective, perhaps just 5 points just to call out that I would think of as policy priorities. To really think about pensions, the pension system and the pension reform. We can talk about this some more, but clearly, we have a lot of pay-as-you-go systems here in Europe, which aren't providing the capital into the capital markets in the same way as we see in other regimes. Securitization is important, and clearly helping ESMA become a proper SEC-style pan-European markets regulator would be important as well. So I think these are all policy priorities which we would absolutely like to see reflected.
And Francesco, the European Commission has also been very articulate on its mission to improve financial literacy among young people and among Europeans generally, and has published several frameworks to help develop national policies. Just how integral is this, and what are your thoughts on the current investment mindset in Europe?
I think it's enormous. And the reason is, we in Europe have roughly 34% of our household assets in deposits with banks. Harnessing even a small portion of that could be an enormous opportunity to drive growth and innovation. If we could channel even 5% of that, that could make, according to a study that I've read, a difference of just under 2 trillion to the productive capital that is deployed within the EU. So education is very important. It's pivotal because I think education helps people have the confidence to invest. And while it may take a long time to harness the power of pension system reform, having more retail participation, obviously with the right safeguards, and moving some of that money into the capital markets, into companies to fund their growth and innovation is something that we should really care about.
Okay, so we actually, Francesco, interestingly, we actually asked our audience on social media platforms about this topic. So let's just jump over to Ada Sanchez there to see what people had to say about this.
Yes, Angela. So as we are speaking about financial education, we wonder if our digital audience feel that they are sufficiently educated on the best way to invest their money. And sadly, we asked them, and 68% of our followers say they don't feel they know enough about how to invest, which is a worrying number, I might say, Angela.
Indeed, that is very worrying, and certainly some work to do there to help Europeans feel confident about how to best invest their money. Are you surprised there, Francesco, by that outcome?
Not at all. I think it's something that we need to build. We need to build both the supply side in terms of the investment opportunities through creating better and deeper capital markets, but at the same time we have to create the demand side by having those educational efforts that will give people the confidence to put their money into the capital markets.
Interesting. Okay, so moving away from that mindset, like you said, of investing in property and high interest rate bank accounts into capital markets.
It's not as productive. I mean, and I think the reason it also matters is that we have a changing demographic in Europe, and the old age dependency ratio is something that we need to worry about. Right now you have roughly 3 working age population per every 1 retirement age person, and that is going to probably move to less than 2 to 1 by 2050. So it's really important to be not solely depending on the pay-as-you-go system, but creating the opportunity for savings and ultimately securing the financial futures of people who are of a certain age.
Okay, Francesco, thank you. Well, as well as improving financial literacy, another task at hand is keeping Europe competitive whilst creating a net zero green economy by 2050 with the EU Green Deal. Well, how can the EU help to compete, or hope to compete, with China and massive US subsidies supporting green industry from the Inflation Reduction Act in the US if member states are unwilling to pool their resources? Do you see this as a big problem at the moment?
I think national policies are perfectly welcome if they ultimately are part of the broader project to reduce emissions by 90% by 2040. That should be the goal. And if we can all look each other in the eye and say the policies that we have at the national level are supportive of achieving that goal, then it's fine for them to be national policies. On the Green Deal versus the Inflation Reduction Act, I mean, what I would say is, why not look at what features are potentially things that we can learn from? You know, there are different ways that the Inflation Reduction Act deals with incentives. Incentives are output-based as opposed to input-based. In the Green Deal, we have demand and supply-side incentives in the US and only supply-side incentives in the EU. So these are things that we can look at to potentially see how we can become more competitive. But ultimately, back to the points I was making earlier, competition also is helped by the capital markets and the discipline that they provide.
And on the environmental point, Francesco, Barclays announced earlier this year that it will no longer fund certain categories of new oil and gas fields. What's your view on ESG based on what you're seeing and doing? Have ESG concerns fallen down the agenda, do you think?
I don't think so at all, actually. I think for my clients and indeed for my colleagues, it remains a hugely important topic. And people understand that the energy transition is one of the key topics of our time, and that it's going to take a lot of money, obviously. I think the estimates are about 400 billion to 2030 for the EU to fund its energy transition, and then roughly 550 billion per year until 2050. So these are huge amounts of money. And those clearly are investments that cannot only be done by member states or by the national governments. We need the whole of the industry to buy in to this transition, and that is what we see reflected in our clients.
Francesco, thank you very much for joining us on The Big Question. It's been a pleasure to speak to you. I'm going to let you go and sit down and enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for watching that special edition of our new business show, The Big Question. That was Francesco Ceccato, the CEO of Barclays Europe. I'm Angela Barnes. Thank you for watching. Back to you, Maya and Jeremy.
Many thanks to Francesco Ceccato and Angela Barnes for that live recording of The Big Question. If you've just joined us, this is Euronews Live from the Albert Hall in Brussels.
And we can now offer you another extract, this one's hot off the press, of another major political interview that we have just recorded. This time, our colleagues in Athens have interviewed the Greek Prime Minister, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, about the upcoming elections. And this is what he has on his mind.
I think these are particularly important elections for Europe as a whole, given the broader economic and geopolitical context. They're taking place in a very turbulent period with a war raging on our eastern flank, with a substantial humanitarian crisis unraveling in Gaza as Europe is exiting from a very, very difficult 5 years. I think it is also an opportunity for us to take stock of what we have achieved during the last European electoral cycle and to highlight the significant successes of the European Union through the cooperation of all the institutions, We've been able to defend ourselves successfully against COVID. We set up the Next Generation EU, which for countries such as Greece has a particular importance in terms of helping us boost our growth and also facilitate the green and the digital transition. We've remained against all odds or against the predictions of some of our enemies united when it comes to Ukraine. And now we need to set our sights on the next cycle and make sure that we are fit for purpose to address the new upcoming challenges. I think there will always be voices that challenge the successes of Europe, and indeed some of I would say, the complaints may be justified, but at the end of the day, if one looks at the overall picture, I remain firmly committed that the future of the European Union is bright and that Europe has been able to deliver for its citizens. And that is why it is important for us to make the case regarding what we have achieved, but also what we need to achieve going forward. Because as you look at the next electoral cycle and the big issues that we have ahead of us, the ones that I would personally highlight are three. First of all, the need to turn strategic autonomy from a slogan into a real and effective policy. Look at defense, for example. We not only need to spend more on defense, but we need to coordinate our defense spending. The second challenge has to do with overall European competitiveness, how we can ensure that Europe remains competitive vis-à-vis China, the US and the Global South. This will mean better jobs and better paying jobs for European citizens. The third challenge is more specific and more sectoral. It has to do with agriculture and our farmers. At a time when food security is very high our agenda, we need to understand that some of the steps that we took over the past 5 years regarding the green transition have put too much pressure than maybe we even anticipated on our farmers, and that we need to make sure that the green transition is executed at a speed that does not significantly impact the income of our farmers.
Well, thanks very much to our team in Athens for that extract from the Global Conversation with the Greek Prime Minister, and you can see the full version of that on Euronews now and on Euronews.com.
Now, I have a very important question, and first to you, Jeremy, are you registered to vote?
I am registered to vote.
And
I'm
to all of
delighted
you
to be registered to vote.
on TV and online, are you planning on voting in the next European elections in June? What are the issues that you are most concerned about?
Indeed, with those questions in mind, it's time now for us to unveil the results of this poll that we've been talking about at the beginning of this program, the Euronews and Ipsos poll that we put together. Let's have a look at that. Well, I'd now like to welcome up on stage Mathieu Gallard from polling organisation Ipsos, and he has been putting together this poll. Mathieu, welcome, thanks for being with us. Tell us quickly about the countries that you surveyed, the number of people.
It's already a challenge to establish a projection at the national level, so you can imagine at the European one. So we needed to have a very large-scale sample, so we interviewed almost 26,000 people in 18 countries across Europe, the most populated one, and for the 9 remaining countries, We based our projection on the available surveys on parliamentary and European elections.
So you're pretty confident that it's a very broad view that you've got, a real view of what Europeans actually think.
So let's start with the big countries. So what can you tell us about Germany, for instance?
Yeah, Germany is a fascinating example of one of the major trends at the EU level in terms of electoral politics. I mean fragmentation. You know that Germany, during decades after World War II, was marked by a very, very stable and strong two-party system, but it is no more. It's true that in our survey, the center-right CDU-CSU is clearly ahead with 29% of the votes, but it's not such an impressive result for the main opposition party in Germany. For example, the last time that the CDU-CSU was in opposition during a European election, it was in 2004, then it gets 45% of the votes. So the situation is not the same.
I'm going to be voting in France. What's the situation there?
Yeah, the situation is quite straightforward in France. Actually, if you remember first what happened 5 years ago, then the list backed by Emmanuel Macron, the president, got 22% of the vote and was just 1 point behind Marine Le Pen's Rassemblement National. And you can see the difference. Now we have a list which is barely at 18% and which is 13 points behind Marine Le Pen's Rassemblement National. So a massive change in 5 years.
In your views, is it the fastest growing far-right party across Europe? Because you've surveyed...
Among the major countries in Europe, clearly France is one of the most impressive examples of the rise, and a dramatic rise of the far-right, yeah.
Let's move on to Italy then.
Yeah, Italy is a totally different situation because here you have a strong radical right. It's true, because you have Giorgia Meloni's Fratelli d'Italia with 27%. You can add Matteo Salvini's Lega with 8%. It makes 35%. But actually, 5 years ago, these two parties had 40% of the votes. So there is a decline for the radical right in Italy. So you can see that the dynamics, the trends are actually very different from country to country.
And then if we look at Spain, which we've already talked about Spain.
Yeah, again, a totally different situation. Unlike in France, unlike in Italy, in Spain, the two main traditional parties are actually quite strong. And after the emergence of Podemos, of Ciudadanos, of Vox during the last decade, they both strike back, actually. And you have the Conservative Popular People's Party, which is ahead in our survey, and it is very interesting. We can see that right-wing voters in Spain are very motivated because they are angry against the agreement that Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez needed to reach in order to establish his government after last year's election.
So let's go east now with Poland. What can you tell us about Poland?
Again, a very different situation. Here, the radical right is clearly declining. If you have a look at the survey results for Jarosław Kaczyński Law and Justice Party, with 29% of the vote, it actually it is a sharp decline compared to what happened to this party 5 years ago. Then it received 45% of the vote. So a real decline for the radical right. And on the opposite, all the parties backing Prime Minister Donald Tusk are on the rise. It is true for his center-right party, but it is also true for his allies on the center and on the left.
It's interesting because each country is just so different, isn't it? It's extraordinary. We think it's the European Union, but then you look at that. And what about Northern Europe, Sweden? What's happening there?
Yeah, we wanted to have a look.
Yeah, we wanted to have a look at that, didn't we?
Definitely, because Sweden is one country where the left is actually very strong. You can see that the Social Democratic Party is clearly ahead in our survey. And if you add the 4 parties in the left-wing coalition, they make for 55% of the voters against 43% for the coalition that is governing the country nowadays, the right-wing coalition.
And it's interesting that we have a big social democratic party and a government that is center-right.
Exactly. You can see that probably is not very popular these days.
So let's switch to the simulations inside the European Parliament. So what can you tell us about the future European Parliament after the June election?
Exactly. So we built this projection in terms of seats. So you can see that there is not a huge change in the fundamentals of the European Parliament, but there is a slight shift of its center of gravity towards the right. If we go in the details, what is happening? We have two groups which are gaining ground. These are the two radical right groups, the ID group and especially the ECR group. We have two groups which are more or less stable, the EPP group and the left group. And we have three groups which are declining compared to what happened to them 5 years ago, the S&D group, the Greens group, and especially the Renew group.
It's interesting, and I'm just for everybody who's looking at this for the first time, just to try and understand it properly, just the circle on the outside is the 2019 situation, inside is 2024. When we're looking forward then, looking at that, is obviously coalitions, right? Is what we're going to be talking about.
So let's talk about possible scenarios. For instance, if we think of a right-wing coalition.
Yeah, we know very well that the European Parliament doesn't operate as in a majoritarian parliamentary system where the government is backed by a stable majority in Parliament. But it's interesting to see the different scenario. So here we have a grand coalition, and this is the only coalition that actually has a majority, the coalition between the EPP, the S&D, and the Renew group. If we have a look at the other scenario that we built, the other coalition scenario, we had, for example, we tried to see what would happen if the EPP, the Renew group, and the ECR group tried to form a coalition. And actually, they don't have a coalition. It only makes for 46% of the MEPs, so it would be not enough to have a strong and stable coalition. And it's exactly the same if we try to have a right-wing coalition formed by the EPP, the ECR, and the ID group. They would have just 45% of the MEPs.
Okay. So we have a simulation also for a far-right coalition then, but as you say, they couldn't really make it work.
Exactly.
Yeah, because you need 361.
So if, for instance, Viktor Orban in Hungary, his party Fidesz, joins the European Conservatives and Reformists, could that make a majority for a coalition on the right?
It would be not enough, but you are right, it's very important. There are a lot of uncertainties around this projection. First, because this is a poll, so there is a margin of error. Second, because this is a poll that has been carried out 3 months before the election, at a time where most of the voters actually don't pay a lot of attention to the campaign, and the campaign is just beginning, and because many parties could change their affiliation between the election day and the first session of the parliament. And it could change, for example, if the Fidesz joins the ECR would not be the 5th group in the parliament, but the 3rd group, even if that would not be enough to form a right-wing coalition. But for example, if you imagine that the Italian Movimento Cinque Stelle joins the Greens group, then the Greens group would just enjoy a perfect stability, contrary to a sharp decline that we project for now. So a lot of things can change.
It's utterly fascinating listening to you. And you know what I'm amazed and totally impressed by is your ability to remember all these numbers. There's just no way I
and
could
all
do
these
that.
parties too.
And all the parties, all the numbers. And I see down here the politicians are watching that and thinking, ooh, where am I on there? Everybody should be interested by this. Everybody who's going to be voting, engaging with this, please head over to Euronews.com where you can see all of those results. They can also find out more about some of the opinion survey, right? Over the course of the next couple of days, we're going to be bringing out more information about Europeans' intentions to vote, what they think about the European Union. It is absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much, Mathieu, for being here.
Thank you.
And now I'm going to invite up on stage Boyd Wagner, who's been working with us on various fun election tools. Boyd, thank you very much for being here as well. On our website, on Euronews.com, you've been developing extraordinary fun devices in order to understand what the political situation is like. Just tell us quickly about what you've been doing.
Well, that's right. Not everybody has Matthew's brain and cannot remember all those numbers, as you acutely point out. So we wanted to create a space where we could reference every last bit of political information that exists out there. And here in the EU, there's a lot of that. So when you go to our website, as you see here, that is now live, polls.euronews.com, you see this interactive map. The map is kind of the basis of what we do. You can scroll over and see things from the current seats to the projected seats.
So I can just go in there and have a look at what is going to happen in any given country?
That's exactly right. You can navigate via the map, or you can navigate via the drop-down bar. You can select the country and pull up the numbers that you see. This section that you see right now is our guidebook. So our guidebook is where we wanted to present just a real quick brief on each country so that you get a sense of all the numbers that exist out there, from the seats that each party holds to a quick state of play, a quick reference on the current political situation that exists in each of those countries.
Wow, it's a fascinating tool. That must have taken you a very long time to build that.
It did. We could still be working on it, I'm sure, to this day.
What's your favorite bit about it?
Well, there's a lot that goes on to it, and we'll get to that. But we also have part of this. As you go through, you'll see sections where we can go back and forth. You'll see this analysis tool. We have a nice team of about 8 or 9 people that are stationed all throughout Europe who are political insiders. They have policy research backgrounds. They have political party backgrounds. They have academic backgrounds. And they are the source for this information, where we're able to get in there and get a little bit of a deeper dive into all of the analysis and all the numbers and all the trends that you'll see throughout Europe, especially in these coming weeks, as Matthew points out. People begin to wake up to the coming elections here in June.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much, Boyd. It's just, please, sorry, and the website, I guess?
Yeah, well, of course. The one last feature we need to be sure to point out is the most unique part of our platform, which is the Euronews forecast tool. Using the forecast tool, you can get on there and create your own version of Parliament. We use our Euronews projected forecast numbers to create a template for that. But using that template, you can decide where votes are going to go. Perhaps if you, like Matthew, think that AfD in Germany is not having quite the rise that people projected a few months ago, you can begin to scale back those numbers and hand them off to other places. You can also take and build your own coalitions. You guys were talking a little bit about the coalitions that can be formed. You can go in there to our forecast tool and build those coalitions yourself, so that if you think, oh, maybe that ECR, EPP coalition does form, well, you can see exactly how that builds out using the numbers that we have.
It's almost like a game.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun.
It is.
And I'm guessing by your accent, you're going to be voting this year as well, but in a different election in a different part of the world.
That is correct.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Good luck with that, Boyd. Thank you very much for coming on stage. It's time for us to wrap up. I'd like to invite up on stage the other anchors who've been here today. It's been great fun. Angela Barnes, Maeve McMahon, Shona Murray, Sasha Vakulina, and Ida Sanchez. Please come up here.
And thanks to everyone for joining us for this very special Euronews on-air event live from the European capital of Brussels.
Please stay with us wherever you get your news, if it's on our fantastic app, if it's on social media, Euronews.com, Euronews Television, wherever you like to watch Euronews. Please stay with us, because it's not just politics, we're also covering health, climate, environment, technology, culture, and of course those famous no-comment videos.
And throughout this European election campaign, we have the news, debates, analysis, fact checks that you need to understand for this major political moment.
So let us know your thoughts on social media, and follow Euronews on TV and also on Euronews.com.
I love the colors.